Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Future of Jewish podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Hoffman. On this episode, I am joined by Raphael Shore, a Canadian-Israeli film writer, producer, and rabbi. He is also the founder of OpenDor Media, a Jewish educational organization, as well as Clarion Project, whose stated mission is to expose the dangers of extremism. Enjoy my interview with Raphael Shore. Raphael, thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure. We recently became friends, and you're really an intriguing individual, somebody who is a visionary in the Jewish world. But before we get to your vision, let's talk about your past, your experience, where you're from, where you grew up, what you've been doing all these years. Take us into that.
Sure. First of all, it's a pleasure to spend time with you, and it's a pleasure to be your friend. And thanks for having me on your podcast. Yeah, I'm originally from London, Ontario, Canada, which is a place with a small Jewish community. And my father grew up in a town he was the only Jew in the town. But we grew up with a strong Jewish identity, not too much Judaism, but really proud of our Jewish roots. And my parents were involved, UJA Federation, fighting for Soviet Jewry, Hadassah. And so I knew I was a Jew. And it was when I was 18 years old, my twin brother ended up coming to yeshiva. We had just finished summer in Israel, a summer camp. And he ended up dropping into yeshiva and staying there. So we were all shocked, but that ended up leading me on a path to explore my Judaism. And right after college at University of Toronto, I came to study, and that resulted in me being inspired enough to decide to make my life here in Israel.
Interesting. So you get to Israel, and I guess you got to Jerusalem, or were you somewhere else?
Yes, the yeshiva in Jerusalem, yeah.
So you're in Jerusalem, and what year is this? Just for reference.
This was 80 to 82.
So from 82 to, let's say, I know the answer, but from 82 to 2009, what did that look like for you?
Well, I ended up, see what happened was when I could say discovered Judaism, because I went to Hebrew school, and it was, it just gave me the wrong impression about what Judaism was. And so when I discovered Judaism at age 20, I was super inspired. I'd already fallen in love with Israel, just like you had fallen in love when you first came. And so the combo basically was just like, wow, it's awesome to be Jewish. And then I realized how much my friends and family, for the most part, were unaware, had not had this beautiful heritage and the peoplehood shared with them. And so I decided to dedicate myself to learning a lot myself. Spent 5 years studying yeshiva, and then to spend my life in Jewish education. And so I worked for Aish Torah and became the COO of Aish International. Eventually headed the outreach educational programs, and it was a very exciting time. And I spent a couple decades working for Aish, and it was a great time. We brought a lot of young Jews. Before Birthright, we were bringing thousands of young Jews to Israel on trips, and they were discovering the greatness of being Jewish by being here.
So let's go back to your comment about, I think you said you had the wrong impression of what it means to be Jewish and Judaism. What was that wrong impression?
Yeah, sadly, and the sad part is that I know that my experience was not unique. It's the story of most American Jews who grew up in conservative and reform or less backgrounds and were sent to Hebrew school a few times a week before they were 13. The standards for the educational system were incredibly low. And frankly, there was nothing at all inspiring or relevant about the content that we were given. And as young kids, we picked up on the, shall we say, hypocrisy, the expectations that we're supposed to be committed to this Jewish religion and this Jewish people, despite the fact that we were not being given reasons for doing it. And so the result was we just came out feeling that that it's a waste of time and that Judaism itself is irrelevant. And that's how we graduated at age 13, enough to send us away into the wild blue yonder of life, feeling that Judaism's irrelevant and being Jewish is pretty irrelevant. And that's pretty sad.
I agree with you. It's obviously an experience that I share. And as you said, many other people share, not just in youth, but we also see it, I think, in adulthood, right? And it's unfortunate. I'm curious to know, when I think you said at the age of 20, you discover that Judaism and being Jewish is awesome. So is that more like on the Israel side, or was that a personal journey? What was the sort of transformation that you went through to get to that conclusion?
Well, I'll share it with you, but first I'm reminded of there's two anecdotes that I'll share with you when we were young to describe that my brother and I, my twin brother and I, we went on this journey pretty much together, not in parallel, but we ended up following a similar path. And when we were young, we wouldn't eat in our house, we wouldn't eat bacon. My mom said, it's not kosher. And we said, well, we're not doing anything else, so why aren't we eating bacon? So why are you getting so religious on us? It's not rational. It's not consistent. So we put pressure on our parents. We ended up eating bacon at the home. And then another anecdote was that my parents said, okay, it's Yom Kippur, it's Rosh Hashanah, we go to synagogue. And we're saying, what? We're twice a year we're going to synagogue. We're not religious, anything but. And my brother said, I'm not going, I'm going to go to school. So he woke up early in the morning and found his way across town to school to avoid going to synagogue. So we were the most rebellious kids in the school. We destroyed the teachers. We were not good kids because we really didn't respect them. And we were the two that ended up becoming religious because we did have that desire for truth, and it was not being delivered. So that when, getting back to your question, so that when at age 18 for him and 20 for me, I was presented a very mature, intelligent Judaism that was from very smart people, I was frankly shocked, and I couldn't believe that this was what Judaism had in its heritage, and it kind of blew my mind. So it was very much Judaism that had turned me on. At the same time, I had grown up kind of Zionist. I'd gone to camps and then come to Israel. So I was already super excited about Israel and being part of the Jewish people. But I think it was the combination of both getting excited about Israel and the Jewish people on the one side, and then the religious side, and that said to me, okay, I'm throwing it all in. I'm going all in and moving to Israel and becoming religious.
So you're 20 years old, you're feeling revitalized, if you will, with your Judaism and your Jewishness. Do you become immediately religious, as you said, or what's that process look like?
It was actually, to be specific, I had 1 year to go in university when I came for 2 months to study in yeshiva. And then I had the question, do I finish college at University of Toronto or not? And I decided to honor my commitment to my parents and finish my degree. So during that year, it was a bit of a process. And then as soon as I finished my year, I came back. But I don't know, I guess I was a bit of an extremist. And so I took it on pretty quickly. In fact, someone just showed me yesterday a tinfoiled room, and we're coming up to the holiday of Passover, of Pesach, and I think I tinfoiled my entire kitchen, because when you don't know so much, which is where I was at early on, when you don't know so much, you'd end up doing more. So I think I tinfoiled my entire kitchen to make sure it was kosher for Pesach that first year. So I took it on probably too fast. It was a little difficult.
So let's go back to 2009, circa 2009 at least. And I think around that time you leave Aish and you start a company called, it was called back then Jerusalem U, it's called today OpenDor Media. Take us through that period of your life.
Yeah, well, my rabbi at Aish Torah is Rabbi Noah Weinberg. There's a good book written about him, and he was an amazing human being and not well understood, because one thing he didn't care about was PR and worrying about what people thought of him. But he was probably the most entrepreneurial and ambitious Jewish leader, in the last 50 years. I wouldn't say bar none. He's, in the group of the top 10 kind of Jewish leaders. And it was an exciting time to be part of a very new, exciting movement of Jewish outreach that now is a cottage industry, and now there's organizations in every city and on every college campus, and always out of the box, always trying to do more. And it was very exciting to be there. But in 2009, Rabbi Weinberg passed away, and I did not. I was not confident in the succession plan, and additionally, I had my own ambitions, and I wanted to do things my way and not be hampered by an organization and its brand. So I wanted to do something new. And I had started to make films, which was my passion already back from university days. And I said, you know what? I believe that we can use film and media to educate the entire generation of young Jews. And so that's what I set out to do by founding Jerusalem U.
So Jerusalem U in the early years, how would you describe it?
Well, we were making feature films about the Jewish people, telling really interesting stories. I'm sitting here in my office. So like we made this film called Beneath the Helmet about 5 young Israeli paratroopers and what it's like to go from high school to the home front. And that film ended up being on Netflix. And we made another film called Israel Inside about the high-tech revolution. We've made this film, Sustainable Nation, about Israel's water and energy story. So we were making feature films, and it was being seen by millions, and telling a different story, a more exciting story about who the Jewish people are and who Israel is. And then we said, you know what? This doesn't have to be only feature films. We can also do shorter films and use YouTube and use the other tools of the generation. So we were basically then creating products that were good for schools, and the teachers could bring in quality content into schools. So that's what we were doing. We were doing hundreds of and thousands of community events and getting our content into schools and getting it seen on digital platforms.
Amazing. Going back to Rabbi Noah Weinberg, I know you said, you were not just inspired, but probably learned a lot from him as well. What are some of the core things that you took from your time with him, working with him, being close to him, that you've applied to OpenDor Media and other initiatives that you've been involved with?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think number one is a sense that we're partners with God. So, and God, as Rabbi Weinberg used to say, God has big pockets, and so everything's possible. Anything's possible. Everything's possible. It's not about us, and the only thing that's getting in the way of really changing and making a major contribution in the Jewish world is our own vision and our own sense of what's possible. And so I have taken that with me. It was difficult because he was always pushing us to do more and more, and it was uncomfortable working for Rabbi Weinberg, but it definitely pushed me to believe in myself. And then I think that was number two, was just a sense of confidence. I was 25 years old, and I became the educational director of a program that didn't exist in the Jewish world called the Jerusalem Fellowships. And as I mentioned, we were bringing hundreds of kids, even in the first few years, of college students. And we were meeting with ministers of the government, prime ministers, members of Knesset. We were touring, we were studying Judaism. For a month at a time, it was like $1 million program. I was 25 years old. I designed the whole education and ran it. And So it was a sense of, it's not about your training. If you have the will, if you have the desire, if you know it's the right thing to do, just do it. God will give us the kalim. God will give us the skills necessary, like Bezalel in the Torah. He did not. He was the one who built the tabernacle with all the artwork and incredible. Like, he wasn't trained in any great Egyptian university, but you throw yourself in and you take responsibility and you make it happen because it needs to happen. That's the idea of Jewish leadership. Is you do something that's needed and you make it happen, and you'll figure it out how to do it.
I love that. I read somewhere that you also founded the Clarion Project. Can you take us into what that is and why you started it?
Yeah, sure. The Clarion Project is an organization that fights extremism of all kinds, from the left, from the right. But in the early 2000s, after 9/11, it was kind of a sea change in the world. And it coincided. Israel was facing the Intifada, which was being led by radical Islamists, people who had radical Islamist ideology, Hamas, Arafat, the PA, and Islamic Jihad. And at the same time, America is being attacked by Al Qaeda. So it was one ideology that was behind it all, but very few people understood it. And so, again, with the educational background and the filmmaking background, we said, we can enter into this area and help educate Americans as well as Jews, all Americans, including Jews, that there's an ideology behind this that we need to be concerned about. It's not a war against terror. What's terror? It's a war against. We're fighting. You don't say we're fighting in World War II. We're fighting tanks. You say we're fighting the Nazis. And so there was a lot of obfuscation that was happening in the world. And we came onto the scene and said, no, let's label it. There's a problem of radical Islam. And we created some films. In fact, one of our films, Obsession, Radical Islam's War Against the West, was probably the most distributed film in America. Probably about 100 million people saw the film through DVDs at that time. And so it was, we made a very large impact because we felt that this was an opportunity to show that the enemy that the Jewish people are facing in Israel is the same enemy that America is facing. And it was very not well understood. So we entered that fray, and we created over the past 15 years a number of feature films that have been seen, as I say, by tens of millions. And then we also now are working hand in hand with the police, national security, to help find extremists of all kinds who are threatening Americans, not just Jews.
Interesting. So education seems to be the common thread in a lot of what we've talked about thus far, and in basically everything you're involved with. I'm curious to know your opinions on the existing Jewish education system and your thoughts about how it can be improved, modified, innovated, etc.
Well, first, it's a good question. First of all, that's why you and I met, and that's why we've become friends, because I think we share a common answer to that question. And if, unfortunately, I've dedicated my life. I don't say it's unfortunate. I'm happy that I've dedicated my life to the education cause in the Jewish people. What's unfortunate is that, in my view, the system is fairly broken. Now there's certainly a number of great educators. There's a number of great institutions. But overall, when we look at the Jewish world, we have to give ourselves a very low grade. Why? Because the purpose of education has to have a goal. And the goal of Jewish education should be to excite and inspire young Jews to feel great about being Jewish and Judaism and Israel. And when we look at the Jewish people and we observe an 80% assimilation rate, when we observe that the great majority of Jews have either received very little education and what they received was not so good, or even if they received a lot of education, they're still not turned on, then we have to, we have to look at it and draw the conclusions. So that's why my answer to your question is the Jewish people, the Jewish world deserve a very low grade. However, a caveat is that it is a great challenge. Judaism, we've been around for 3,500 years. Israel faces anti-Semitism in the guise of not being anti-Semitism. The Judaism is hard to compete against a liberal, open society that says, do whatever you want to do. So whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do. Morality is defined very differently in, classical, progressive American society, and that's where young Jews are being raised. And so it's a very difficult job of Jewish education to take Jews in that milieu and turn them on and get them excited about being Jewish. So I'm saying we've done a bad job overall as a people, but it's a very, very difficult job to do well.
Right, but if I understood you correctly, you said that Judaism, it's hard for it to compete against progressivism, wokeism. That's what you said, right?
Yes.
So I would argue that the way that Judaism is presented today, which is much like the way that you grew up with it and that I grew up with it, despite the fact that we're from two different generations, I would argue that if Judaism was delivered in a more inspiring and exciting way, that it would, I don't like the word compete because it's a either or. I actually think progressive, liberal mentality and way of life can fit alongside a Jewish and Israel, thinking and way of life. I wonder if both Judaism and Israel were presented in more exciting and innovative, creative, and inspiring ways, that we wouldn't have to choose one or the other, meaning, the liberal, progressive, whatever, versus the particularism, right, is what they call it. To me, that seems like a good place to start. I don't think it's that hard to start. We know that financial and other resources are plentiful. In fact, maybe even too much in the Jewish world. What do you say to all that?
Well, I agree with you. That's what I'm saying. We deserve a low grade. I started Jerusalem U, which is OpenDor Media, because of that very reason, that it's not, Judaism and Israel is not being delivered in an exciting and inspiring way. We're not using the tools at our disposal. So, what we've done is taken, great teachers and packaged them. And then we've turned content into great films and videos, and that can go into a classroom. So we're not relying on a teacher who might not be so great. So the whole thrust of everything I'm doing mirrors what you're saying, that we need to package Judaism in an exciting and inspiring way. And while I also concur that it doesn't have to be an either or, I believe that Judaism is not political, so to speak. So you can, so that you can be a Democrat, you can be a Republican, you can be a left-wing Israeli, you can be a right-wing Israeli, and still be totally into your Judaism and support and a Zionist. So these are not givens, but at the same time, there are some values that are in conflict, like you mentioned, particularism. A lot of the woke concept today flies in the face of particularism. We're one global family, so the idea of nationalism and Zionism is a little bit in conflict for many people. And so there are issues that need to be untangled, and there are issues that need to be grappled with. That's why we call our YouTube channel Unpacked, because we're helping people unpack these complex issues so that they can still, share their wonderful liberal values that they have, but also understand the Jewish approach.
Right. Okay, but let's go back to the concept of how we package education, edutainment, and so forth. Obviously, Jewish education and edutainment, because ultimately, you're right that as we see it today, there is a conflict in many ways between particularism and universalism. But my feeling, at least in my experience, I grew up in a very universalistic house in university, San Diego State University. It became more amplified, my belief in universalism. And because at that time, I would say I was more educated in that sort of thinking and doing and living. When I became more exposed in an interesting and exciting and engaging way into both Judaism and Israel, now, like you said, sometimes they go, they can live in parallel paths, and sometimes they contradict each other. And so if you have all the information of both the universalism and particularism, in this case Judaism and Israel, and you have to make a choice, well, at least make a choice with all the information, not with a ton of information on one thing, which in this case is universalism, which is what I used to do, and a very, very small granular amount of information and knowledge and wisdom about Judaism and Israel. Because my feeling, not with everyone, but my feeling is that the vast majority of people, if they had the same amount of information and knowledge about both of those worlds, my feeling is both Jews and non-Jews would say, actually, I kind of like some of this Jewish stuff a little more than I originally thought.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you. I think that Jewish thought is incredibly compelling. There's no question that Judaism and the Jewish people have inspired most of Western civilization. It's a well kept secret. When you read about the philosophy, the political underpinnings and philosophical of Western society, you learn about Greece and Rome. But fact is that it's Jewish and Judeo-Christian, which is really Jewish, that really underpins so much of both philosophical America and liberal democracy today in the Western world. And people just don't realize it. And Judaism, look, it's no coincidence. We're here 3,500 years later. We've met up, Judaism and the Jewish people have met up with every single major civilization in human history. We've been persecuted by just about every one of them. We've survived. Our system of thinking is pretty much the exact same way that it was at the beginning, with relevant moral, political, philosophical system, ethical system in place, just richer than it ever was before. And we're still standing, and all these other ones have faded away. So our core values are so incredible. And that's why, everything I'm saying is just why it's just so sad. Again, just going back to the other side, it's just so sad that most Jews, and like you say, also most non-Jews, also just have no clue about this incredibly rich heritage, which is eminently available for everybody. And so, it's my life's mission to try to bring that to them. And that's why I'm excited about what you're doing too at Izzy and Jewel.
Appreciate it. So let's say I have a check for 1 billion with a B dollars, not shekels, not Canadian dollars, US dollars. Although I don't know how strong the dollar is right now, but let's pretend it's strong. You've made it your life mission to, advance the Jewish people essentially. How would you infuse that $1 billion into your mission?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first of all, I would say that I would spend about half of it, kind of like what we were deciding before. I'm involved in two approaches. I'm involved with OpenDor Media, which is the positive side, where I am trying to inspire young Jews with what's great about being Jewish. But I started the Clarion Project because there's a need to fight the bad guys. And I think Judaism has always been sumera v'aseh tov. You got to push away the bad and you got to do the good. And so, I would immediately split the money in half, and you got to there's no question that the Jewish people are under attack. Israel's under attack. There's huge money going in to undermining the Jewish people, the state of Israel. So I would definitely use a good chunk of it to push back, because we are so outnumbered and outgunned from a financial point of view in that regards, and our enemies are vast, and most people are very unaware of what's going on on a day-to-day basis in this fight, especially about Israel. So I would spend half of it that way. I think I would spend the other half on this, maybe a little more on getting content out, on creating inspiring, amazing content. And as we were just saying, the library of possibilities is endless, because Judaism and Israel have so many exciting stories, so much exciting ideas that are in Judaism. And if we package things right, bring in the good educators, the great educators of the generation, package them, and then figure out the distribution channels to get it out there, that's where I would put most of that money, probably 60-70%, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it more. And then the other thing that I would do, which I would address another problem in the Jewish world, which is like there's too many small nonprofit organizations, and everyone's competing for a few dollars, and and there's very few really scaled organizations. So I would take that large amount of cash that you're offering me, and I would leverage it to either to build a few very big organizations that were led by great people. You probably have to pay higher salaries to the great leaders to get them perhaps to give up their for-profit views and spend their time in nonprofit, or to build for-profit companies like you want to do. But I would try to focus on the few organizations that can really be scaled to make a dramatic impact, and try to eliminate that problem of just hundreds of small organizations competing with each other.
Right. I call it financial splintering. And I just think it's just sad more than anything, because, we're all supposed to be fighting the same fight, more or less. Obviously there's different means to the same ends. I'm not saying we all have to have groupthink. We know that's actually counter-effective, but at the same time, it's also counter-effective to be participating and cultivating financial splintering. So,
Right.
There has to be a better way of doing it. You mentioned like scaling organizations, and that's been a huge concern and driving force of mine, both at Izzy and at Jewel, because a great idea that lives in a pocket, in a bubble, in a silo, or is somehow fragmented, is has a very low ceiling. And I think it's nice that local, even regional and national initiatives are great. And I think they were probably more effective once upon a time when the world was not globalized. But in 2022, moving forward, I mean, if you're not thinking on a global level, or at least piloting something that can then, rise to the global level, it just feels like we're doing things a very old and increasingly outdated way. I want to know from you, though, what's one or two organizations that you feel are really, doing something that could be a game changer outside of course, OpenDor Media?
Yeah. On that note, we were recently selected by a very large, fairly new Jewish foundation. And we were found by them, by this particular foundation, because they were looking for only organizations that, like you just described, that have scalability, global vision, and leadership, and therefore the potential to really make an impact. In the nonprofit world, to be a successful, scalable nonprofit, you need about 10 different qualities, each one very difficult. The strategy, the vision, the leadership, the content, the distribution. fundraising engine. It's very difficult, and so many organizations out there have, you know, 1 or 5 out of the 10, and so they're not gonna scale. I'm proud of the fact that we've put together in OpenDor Media, an organization that got selected for that purpose, and it is really hard to get it right. And I think that a couple other organizations that I find very exciting. One of them is run by a woman who was actually a participant on that program that I described earlier, the Jerusalem Fellowships program. She was a participant on the very first program that we ran, and her name's Lori Palatnik, and she runs a program called Momentum, and it's a kind of like birthright for moms, and it's international in scope. They've got a strong fundraising base. They've got good leadership, and they're making a dramatic impact. So that's one. Another organization that I'm excited about is that we're involved with a little bit is Club Z. Club Z is kind of unapologetic pro-Israel education and training of young Jews in America, and it's refreshing because they're just really unapologetic. I think because they're very straight shooters, they're getting mostly first generation, like Russian, Persians, Israelis, and they're really raising a new generation of young leaders. But when you know, unfortunately, my list is not long. I'm involved with many organizations. I try to help out a lot of organizations where I can, and there's a lot of them that I like. There's a lot with great ideas and good intentions, but not built. You know, I've got a lot of these great management books, business books. I'm a student of those kind of things, and just unfortunately, most of them are not built to scale and built to last.
So let's talk about business and management for a second, because we know that the word business, for-profit, private sector, even entrepreneurship are unfortunately in many ways taboo in the Jewish world. I had one head of a foundation tell me that you can run a nonprofit like a business, it just doesn't have any shareholders. And I thought,
it doesn't have what?
You just don't have any shareholders. Which, you know, right. I thought I think what she was basically saying is you can generate revenues, you just can't distribute them to shareholders, which is fine. We know many nonprofits operate that way. But my feeling, and this is a generalization, is that the mentality that you go into what we can call revenue generation, when you go into it through a nonprofit, right, it's a completely different way of thinking. The kind of people you hire, the kind of people you attract, the products that you ultimately make with those people or services or experiences, versus when you look at things through a true entrepreneurial sense, through a true business sense. You know, you can, a for-profit company can call themselves a B corporation. They can make the statement, if they want to be truly altruistic, that all profits are going to be reinvested into the company or going to be distributed equally among all the employees for bonuses. I mean, there's, you know, this idea that for-profit means that, you know, one person or two people or five people are going to go home super rich and everyone else is going to, like, that's just not. And in the Jewish world, right, in the Jewish world, you know, it just feels that most great Jewish ideas either never get off the ground or do, but then die or never reach their true potential, because they're pushed through this nonprofit, you know, tube that ultimately cannot produce the kind of results and scalability. It cannot attract the best and brightest people at all levels of the organization, not just the top brass. And therefore, what you end up with is what I would call a subpar product, service, and or experience compared to what else is out there in the world today. When I say, you know, when I talk about this for-profit and entrepreneurial and enterprise approach, what comes to your mind?
Well, I think overall your assessment is true, and I'll add to it. One of the greatest problems of the nonprofit sector, especially in the Jewish nonprofits, you just get worn down because fundraising is so hard. Competition, and I'm not blaming anybody for it. The philanthropists who are out there giving away big money, they're being hit up, as we say, so many times by so many organizations, and it's hard to know, and it's hard to decide, and the money's spread around, and so even if you have a big vision, it's very hard to execute because you just get worn down by, okay, it's going to cost us another $200,000. Oh my gosh, there's no way, I can't do it, and so you stop thinking big. And thinking big is the most important thing, as we were saying. It's you got to have the vision. You got to go for it. And then there's also an expectation in the nonprofit world. This is not unique to the Jewish world, but the Jewish nonprofit world, it's in general. There's kind of an expectation that if you were in the nonprofit world, you shouldn't make a nice salary. You should make a humble salary, and so therefore you don't get the kind of talent that you're describing, because if you want to have a CEO of your company, well, you're offering him a tremendous amount of responsibility for a very small amount of money. So you're not going to get the kind of talent that
Well,
is out there.
I would push back on that. There's been
for-profit.
studies that suggest that the CEOs of some of the biggest Jewish organizations make a pretty good amount of money. Now, do they make as much as the CEO of Facebook or Tesla or Microsoft or Apple? No, they're also not bringing that kind of value to the world. So let's call it what it is.
That's true. But I'm talking, it's really an across the board. It's not specific to the CEO. It's the CMO. And
well, I would say the C-suite at a major Jewish nonprofit, from the data that I've seen, is compensated relatively well. I would say the people under the C-suite, the directors and the managers, are basically the ones that I think you're talking about, which is they're sort of asked to work for half of what they might make in the private sector. And then we don't get the talent. And I believe that if you have a great C-suite, but you have a subpar, average, or even B minus director and management suite, at the end of the day, they're the ones that execute. And I don't know how you can expect, when the gap between the C-suite and the rest of the organization is talent and capabilities and experience is so vast. I'm just not sure.
I agree with that, but we should compare notes another time. But I'm not sure that the C-suite is compensated as handsomely. I think they are in the establishment organizations. If you go to work for a federation or a Hillel or or JNF or something like that, perhaps. But the startup, the entrepreneurial young ones that that I would argue have the exciting visions and are thinking out of the box, those are the ones that are scrapping for the money. And so it's very difficult. And a lot of the funders don't like it when those C-suite or other people are getting paid so well. So there's an internal pressure that pushes back against the kind of talent. I'm proud that, again, at OpenDor Media, we're a great place to work because we are trying to pay competitive prices. I think we're fairly unique, and it shouldn't be that way. But the result is that the nonprofit model has limitations, and then there's also people competing. There's not enough collaboration in the for-profit sphere. There's a lot more collaboration because people realize, okay, I don't like that guy, he's my competition perhaps, but if we do something together, we're both going to make more money. Whereas in the nonprofit world, we're all thinking, if we do something together, then the donor is wondering, what are you doing that's different than him? So maybe I won't give you both money, or so you get kind of punished for collaboration, or you at least perceive that you'll get punished. And so there's not enough collaboration. So there's a lot of things in the nonprofit sphere which work against really big vision and out of the box thinking. And especially in this generation where most of the major philanthropists are, a little bit older, and most of the great innovations and where we need to be heading as a people with solving these problems are based on digital and the new trends. And so there's a gap. I used to find until recently that the most difficult part of my job was I was telling people the future is digital education. And I was, people didn't understand what that was. So why should they give to me? They're going to give to the school. And I'm saying, no, we can reach every single Jew on the planet with digital education. It's like, what are you talking about? then COVID came. So that part of it helped.
Right. My fear is that by the time people understand what digital education is, we'll already be in virtual, and then
Yeah.
they'll be investing in digital and not virtual. And then,
Yes.
so we'll see how
We're
that works
slow.
out.
Yeah. We're slow to change. Yeah. Slow to adapt, unfortunately.
I want to ask you one more question, Raphael. Going back to you getting into your Judaism and your Jewishness, what's the one thing that you feel most people, Jewish and or non-Jewish, the one thing that you say, you know what, that's something that if more people knew that one thing, like things could start to be different. What's that one or even two things for you?
That's a good question.
I'm going to let you think just so we don't have quote unquote dead air. I'm just going to give you an example of something that I recently came across.
Okay,
So
sure.
I think, the idea of Shabbat, right? Everyone knows what Shabbat is more or less. And I recently read that basically the idea of Shabbat influenced what became the weekend in the secular world, so to speak. The weekend is now 2 days. I think once upon a time it was one day, if I remember correctly from the history books. But basically the idea that we're not going to work 7 days a week, that we're going to have a separation and a period of obviously rest and relaxation. For the Jews in Shabbat, it's 25 hours or something like that. In the world today, we have a Saturday and Sunday. In Israel, we have Friday and Saturday. To me, I had no idea that that's, this idea that, especially now, we know with the pandemic and people being overworked and the Great Resignation and, people kind of saying enough is enough, and, self-development and self-healing and self-help and all these things of, people really going into their personal lives and making a life, not just making a career. That to me is like, if more people understood that the weekend effectively as we know it today came from Shabbat, and then also understood like some of the core elements of Shabbat, not necessarily from a religious standpoint, although the religious aspects are certainly not bad whatsoever, but just understanding like, yeah, maybe I should turn off my phone for like 8 hours or like 24 hours, or maybe like I should, just be more mindful, right, of like how I'm spending, my Monday through Friday, so to speak, and my Saturday and Sunday, or just my Saturday or just my Sunday, or whatever it is.
Right.
Like, I feel that Shabbat, for like what yoga and meditation, which most people know came from Buddhism, what yoga and meditation are for the world today, like Shabbat can be that thing in many ways, that like spiritual, soulful, for some people religious, lifestyle centric thing that can really improve people's lives. Again, I don't even think at this point you don't have to be Jewish or not Jewish. It's like, yeah, I do Shabbat, I do yoga. Like there's no, most people who do yoga today around the world are not Buddhist, probably don't even realize it came from Buddhism. So I don't know. That's, for me, that's what I would say. And I don't know, have you thought of something up until now?
Yes, I have.
Go for it.
So on that you just mentioned, is that part of the podcast, what you just did? That's included, right?
Of course.
Including what you just said. Yeah.
Of course.
So I just did, I agree with you 100%. And I just participated in this program called the Strategic Coach. It's the largest coaching program for entrepreneurs in the world. I just started it. And one of their core ideas is the free day, that an entrepreneur very often has trouble balancing work and personal and whatnot. So they came up with this great idea of, you got to take 24-hour periods and separate completely from work. So at the break, I went up to the teacher and I said, and they encourage you to do 100 to 150 free days in a year, which is difficult for most people. And I said, listen, as a religious Jew, I got such a head start. Everyone over here is trying to figure out how they're going to get 5 free days, let alone 10 or 50 to 100. I said, before I even start, I've got 70 in the year, because I've got every Shabbat and I've got all the Chagim. And so I agree with you 100%. It just shows the wisdom inherent in Judaism. And I think that's, to me, the core idea that unfortunately has not been communicated well to this generation. And that is that people think of Judaism as a religion. And they think, just like, okay, Christians have Christianity and Muslims have Islam. And so I'm American with this religion thing. And religion is a thing where you go to synagogue and pray and do rituals. And that's like so missing the boat on what Judaism is. And Judaism comes from the word Torah, which means instructions. It's ideas for life. It's wisdom for life. And they're so deep. There's so much depth, and which is why it's no coincidence that, like we said, 3,500 years later, it's our Shabbat that everybody can relate to. Is such a brilliant concept for living a happy and healthy and emotionally healthy life. And there's so many things in the Jewish life that are like that. And essentially, humans are very complicated beings. We're soul. We are, in a Jewish idea, we're a divine soul put into a body. It's a complex mechanism, and managing it, dealing with happiness, sadness, loneliness, challenges, purpose of life, philosophy. It's all there. There's so many brilliant ideas, even the idea of sameach bechelko, what is happiness? It's who is the rich man? It says in the Ethics of the Fathers, who is the rich man? The one who's happy with what he's got. It's such a deep idea that can transform someone's life. Again, the same thing with this guy from this thing. He wrote a book called The Gap in the Gain. It's essentially what I just said. Who's happy? The one who's happy with what he's got. But he turned it into an entire book, entire seminar, entire program. He's teaching the world. We Jewish people have somehow not understood how to take our incredible wisdom for living that is in the Torah and package it in a way that young people can understand how brilliant and helpful it can be to leading a happy and meaningful life.
Recently learned that there's a difference between blame and responsibility, right? There's no one really to blame for the reasons why we have not lived up to what you just talked about, but it's everyone's responsibility. And I think you're one of the people that I look up to, that I appreciate, who's taken on this responsibility, not just yesterday or a month or a year ago, but you've been doing this for a long, long time. You're a wise, kind, very impressive person. I'm glad to have met you, and I'm glad that you have joined me on my podcast, Raphael. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to working together with you to make some big things happen.
Amen.